Are you saying that Israel has enjoyed international diplomatic support up until
No, I
now?
haven't said that. I've said it's enjoyed
Okay.
some international
So
diplomatic
what's
support.
it losing exactly? I'm also
You'll be
curious as to
aware,
what.
Zoe. You'll be aware,
But Peter,
Zoe,
genuine question. I'm
of the.
very curious. How do you think something like this could resolve without arms? And I would be delighted
Well,
if
I
there
didn't
was a
say
peace
that.
there.
You see, I mean, you're incapable of arguing what I say, and you invent things that I haven't said.
Welcome in our panel this evening, Peter Hitchens, columnist for the Mail on Sunday. Good evening, Peter.
Good evening.
And Zoe Strimpel, columnist at the Telegraph. Zoe, good evening to you.
Good evening.
Zoe, I'm going to come to you first of all. What looks like the start of Israel's incursion, some may say invasion. We've had differing words used on the show tonight, even from journalists who we're speaking to in Israel. But it looks like we have the start of it this evening. Is the Israeli Prime Minister, is he going to bite off more than he can chew with this?
I don't think he has a choice. I think he's going to have to bite off a lot, and whether that's more than it appears he can chew now or not, seeing as he has limited support from those who should know better. I guess he has no choice but to do that. I have been not a fan of Netanyahu for all the time that I've been quite a staunch Zionist, but the more I see people holding him up as this, the source of all the world's woes, basically running at him with pitchforks at in New York where he was at the UN, the more I think actually maybe he's onto something. So I think what Israel's doing is incredibly important, courageous, and the rest of the world is gonna basically cash in on what he's doing and what those brave Israelis are doing. People in the way that it's being discussed, including Noga's emphasis that we just heard, is all on the level of politics and discourse. But I think the root of the issue is on one hand 70,000 plus Israelis cannot return to their homes in their own national, sovereign national land because of rocket fire from a terrorist army. And to me, this ground invasion, if it is indeed happening, whether Israelis are the official line is that you can talk about it or not, seems completely irrelevant. I mean, the army probably has its own reasons for not wanting official lines to come out at this or that time. I mean, they're highly, these operations can't, I don't think that's as big of a deal as we're making it. But I think the fact that, I went to Israel in January and I saw the Hezbollah, outposts staring at these northern towns. And it is a gross violation, if for those who hold up UN kind of, conventions and norms and laws as binding. Well, this is a gross violation of the one that says that Hezbollah was to withdraw to the Litani River. I could see with my own eyes that they were right there, and it was bloody unacceptable. And so, therefore, I am actually amazed that they've, hats off to these Israelis for waiting this long.
Okay, Peter.
Well, whenever I see any kind of military operation unfold, the question, how does this end, is the first one which comes to mind, and ought to be the first one which comes to the mind of anybody thoughtful, going right back to the Anglo-French and also Israeli operation at Suez in 1956, and many other operations, and of course Israel's own, how should we say, problematic record in incursions in Lebanon. The heart doesn't leap at the thought of another one. The problems of the Middle East, however they can be solved, or even if they can be solved, which I don't think they can be, cannot necessarily be brought to an end by high explosive. And certainly the use of high explosive in Gaza has not solved any of the problems which emerged from there nearly a year ago. And I don't think in the long term will have done Israel much good. I used to be not so much a defender, but at least somebody who would put in a good word for Benjamin Netanyahu, a man who has over many years been quite seriously, it seems to me, slandered by people who should have known better. But I think his performance over this particular crisis has been very poor. The other thing, which is quite striking to anybody who's followed this thing for as long as I have, is the almost total absence of any real exercise of power from Washington, D.C. There isn't really a government in Washington, D.C. at the moment. There isn't, to all intents and purposes, a president. I don't really think that Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, can substitute for the absence.
Yeah, lame duck.
Strong voice in the White House. And so you really do see a position here where nobody internationally is in charge. I've got no idea what's going on militarily on the Israeli-Lebanese border beyond what you reported, which of course has many gaps in it, and we can't know. it doesn't fill me with the same sort of enthusiasm as it seems to have Zoe in its grip.
Okay, look.
I mean, just to be clear, it's not about whether I'm enthusiastic or you're not enthusiastic. It's about the fact that there is sometimes there's a reason for a war, and that this seems to be one. I think we've entered a strange era where it's like, oh, high explosives are terrible. They're not going to solve things. Let's all hold hands and kind of call for ceasefires. But I don't think that's an option with the particular
Well,
foe.
I haven't said any of that. I haven't said any of that.
Right, but I don't think I'm just saying it's not about me being filled with excitement. It's about
Well, you seem to be quite enthusiastic about the action.
Yeah, I'm enthusiastic but I mean,
well, there you are then.
That's because I believe I don't think it's about. It's not like, oh, war is so much fun. I think there's an incredibly important battle that needs to be waged.
You think this is justified?
Absolutely.
As the Israeli Prime Minister does,
sees this
to get those civilians back into northern Israel
is irrelevant.
Yeah.
It's about,
okay.
I think this is right. Yeah.
One has always to remember that nobody really cares anymore what Britain says internationally. Anyway, why should they? Most of our navy can't put to sea. Diplomatically, we're a nullity. Economically, we're in deficit.
What about Joe Biden speaking earlier, saying the same thing?
Joe Biden's been bleating really for a year, but there's been no sign at all of any attempt to actually say this is what we want you to do, and you're going to have to do it, which you would certainly have had since, for instance, in the days of Henry Kissinger and other notable American leaders who were, how shall I put it, more willing than this American government has been to hold Israel in a bit. I can't. When I mention high explosive, there is an extraordinary idea that still seems to spread even after all the events from the Vietnam War and the Algerian War, that powers can simply by force of arms, and of course the Iraq disaster as well, by force of arms and by spectacular shows of missiles and bombing, can actually defeat movements of this kind simply by quantities of high explosive. I think it's been demonstrated over and over again that however big and powerful you are, that doesn't follow. I remember the opening hours of the Iraq catastrophe in which American admirals were saying it's hammer time, and we were getting lots and lots of films of missiles being fired off at Baghdad. And look where that ended. It ended up with the exact opposite of America's intention of Iraq passing increasingly under the control of Iran, which was the worst possible result for Washington, D.C. Do these people know what they're doing? And plunging into violence whose end you cannot possibly foresee always worries me. I don't know whether Benjamin Netanyahu knows what he's doing, but what I'm absolutely sure of is it looks quite worrying to me, and that Israel's existence is not ultimately dependent on the military power it happens to possess at the moment.
Okay.
That military power depends very heavily, ultimately, on the United States and the rest of the Western world. If Israel loses the political and diplomatic support of the Western world, it's in a very, very bad position. And this is the long-term danger of this.
Are you saying it's had that support up until now, Peter? I mean, that's a very amusing line to take if you ask.
Sorry, am I saying what?
Are you saying that Israel has enjoyed international diplomatic support up until now?
No, I haven't said that. I've said it's enjoyed some international diplomatic support.
So what's it losing exactly? I'm also curious as to what...
Zoe.
But Peter, genuine question. I'm very curious. How do you think something like this could resolve without arms? And I would be delighted if there was a...
Well, I didn't say that, you see. I mean, you're incapable of arguing what I say, and you invent things that I haven't said. It's very common in an argument.
Maybe you haven't been clear enough then.
Just the point is quite plain to anybody who knows position, that Israel has been receiving for many, many years enormous amounts of military and economic support from the United States.
Right. So what's your point, though? How is this particular conflagration supposed to resolve?
Well, my point
through being nice, or through Israel just saying, "Yeah, sure, take over our northern border."
Means something I'm not. If you want to be out Zionisted, I can easily do it if you give me time. That's not the argument
listen,
I'm having.
let's just return to the
I'm
argument.
By the way, I would love
argument
to be
we're having.
Zionist.
Peter,
I'm concerned about the long-term future of the state of Israel, and I think that this could be being endangered by the current policy of the government of Israel. And I think that's
so you think Israel's to kind of really simplify it is cutting off its nose to spite its face. It is potentially upsetting the future of Israel, and maybe
I think it's lost its nose. I think that's where we're differing. Some say, oh, it still could, adhere to this and that norm to please Europe, but I mean, what's happened over the last year suggests. I mean, I just don't see any other possible way of going forwards, and this is a core philosophical difference about how you resolve these things.
Look, I mean, also. We had the UN General Assembly last week, calls for a ceasefire, repeated calls for a ceasefire. When David Lammy spoke to Sky News earlier, he'd just come off the phone to the US Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken. So he is being heavily informed by the United States here. It isn't just, the UK saying it because we can, because we haven't got a massive stake in it. The US does have a big stake in it. And David Lammy is determined to be aligned with the US Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, who's obviously aligned with what we've heard from Joe Biden. So look, all of that together indicates so far that calling for a ceasefire is not really having very much effect at all. Could there be more to flex from the US? Will they? I mean, they announced a big package of military aid last Thursday. It was the next sort of tranche of it to Israel. So there are questions about instability in the Middle East. Should there be any intervention from the United States specifically, but backed up by other Western allies like the UK, like France, who is very aligned with the US over at that UN General Assembly?